Today on Harshaneeyam, we welcome Nancy Naomi Carlson, a renowned poet, translator, and musician. We delve into her profound connection between poetry and personal loss, exploring how translation serves as a powerful tool for healing. As a musician, Carlson shares insights on the profound influence of musicality in her translation process. We also discuss her collaboration with Seagull Books and her acclaimed translations, including the recent SOLIO by Algerian poet Samira Negrouche. Carlson is a recipient of numerous awards, including the 2022 Oxford-Weidenfeld Translation Prize, and her work has been recognized by the New York Times. You can buy Solio using the Amazon link in the show notes. Harshaneeyam is a podcast dedicated to exploring the art and craft of literary translation. We have hosted over 70 translators across 60 languages in the last 3 years, offering unique insights into their creative processes. Follow Harshaneeyam on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. Now let's hear Nancy talking about how she got into writing poetry.
So I guess I was not feeling myself a writer as a child. I remember reading Les Miserables in seventh grade in an English translation. Uh, I remember in elementary school, you get a little sticker, an oval sticker for each book that you read. And I felt like here I am in fifth grade, and I want to have the most oval stickers next to my name with the name of the book. So I started reading lots of books, and I remember being told, maybe it's quality, not quantity. I remember that message, and so I thought, okay, now I have to read longer books and more involved books, and so I guess being competitive is what drove me to literature, though I enjoyed reading the books too. And then things got a little more, the books I read were more complicated, and they were already world literature, reading translations from French especially. And by high school, I had decided I'd major in French in college. I liked the literature, and I liked the darkness of it. So French literature is terribly dark. Uh, so reading Balzac and Hugo and nothing works out. And Madame Bovary, poor Madame Bovary, what happens to her? And I liked that for some reason. And by college and a master's in French language and literature, they gave us a list of 100 books that we had to read, and then they would test us about these books. So every century had its list there, and I gravitated towards the 20th century and the theater of the absurd. That and plays, and maybe it was a time crunch. It was easier to read plays than a novel. Uh, the poetry, the poetry was. I love the 19th century poets, Verlaine, Rimbaud, and Baudelaire. So the plays, I thought, okay, I'll read the plays, and I just what you have a whole stage of chairs, des chaises, and they're sitting there, and the whole play is all about that, or the people buried halfway to their waist in the first act, and then up to the Beckett, up to their neck by the second. It was the human condition, and I think early on I realized for me that was my thought about the human condition, that we want answers. What happens when we die? What's going on? What's the meaning of all this? And the world refuses to give us any. Um, Now, other people have different philosophies about that, but for me, that resonated. And my daughter jokes to me because when I go, "Oh, we're all going to die. We're dying," and she goes, Mom, you've been saying that since you were in your 20s, even before she knew me. She knows this. But there was something about that literature that that drew me in, but I wasn't writing. So writing in high school, I had one poem, and it was in the magazine, or it was about a snowflake, and it was a terrible poem, and it was about the snowflake drifting along. It was called Naivete, and then it drifts along, looking very beautiful, and then hits the ground and splotch, and it's gone. And that is kind of, my poems are probably all variations of that poem. I didn't write anymore. I don't know. I guess, but I was reading. So I had read all these books in French. I wasn't an English major, so I have lots of gaps in my literature, my literary knowledge of English. But French, I got pretty much covered in all those centuries, the medieval poets, and um, so I didn't start to write, and in fact, I didn't like writing. I felt I thought I want it done quickly. What is this rush? And so the feedback I get on my research papers and all was, you need a conclusion. Spend more time on your conclusion. And for me, it was, I got it done. You know what? I need to now sum it up and do that. I didn't like that, um, but I learned how valuable it was. And creative writing, it wasn't until uh, my my second husband, we don't have to go into all those details, but we can. Um, my, my second husband took a course at the Writers Center. And Bethesda Writers Center, you go there at any level of writing, and you sign up for courses. And he took a course in that, and he didn't like it. So it didn't stick with him. Um, but for me, I thought, well, if he can take a course, I'm going to take a course in how to write poetry. And I had a motivation that I had had a baby who had been born and died the day he was born. And it, there was no way I could recover from that. And so it was going on 15 years or more. And I read in a book that if you do something creative to a loss, if you write a letter, the book was Ended Beginnings. And if you write a letter to the one who is no longer there, that's therapeutic. Um, and I guess I hadn't become a counselor then either. I was a French and Spanish and ESOL teacher. So I read that, and then it said, if you do something creative with it. So I said, I am going to write a book of poems, and I'm going to dedicate it to Matthew, and I'm going to win a contest. I can't just write it and self-publish. I want it to be something that is well written, and so I took a course at the Writers Center, and also met someone who read everything that I wrote. Like tennis, you need someone ahead of you in the game. And then she transferred me over, transferred to Stephen Corey, who was the editor in chief of Georgia Review, and he looked at everything I wrote. I would give him $20, and he would look at a bunch of poems. It was amazing, and I think when he gave feedback, I felt that about a third of what he told me I could get, and I could fix my poems. A third of it, he'd tell me what was wrong, and I didn't have it in me to fix it. I didn't know how to do that. I was a beginning poet.
No, sorry for my intervention. What is the most important input he has given you?
I guess he gave me the input that he was to have such a high standard for myself that I almost don't write, because he imparted that in me. Nothing was ever, two-thirds of it was never good enough. And he'd always have things to push me on. And then finally, there was a poem he saw, and he said, I would have published that in Georgia Review. But he couldn't because he was my mentor. But years later, when he wasn't my mentor and I was submitting, and other editors had said they liked my work, then it was okay for him to start accepting my poems. So having someone like that in my life really set the bar really, really, really high. And I think that's the most important thing that he did for my poetry. Um, and then I was reading, still continuing to read poems and magazines to see. Um, and I didn't have time for fiction because it took so long. And I was juggling so many things. Again, there's that it's not, I'm not against fiction. And lately I've been reading the New Yorker's fiction and I'm going, oh, that's the Nobel winner. Here's an excerpt of hers. Oh, okay. Um, or essays. And I started reading essays. And later on, I started writing essays. But was the translation came after I'd been writing poems for a while. Lots of people started saying, well, you were a French and Spanish teacher. Why don't you translate? You're a poet. And I think it never could have happened had I not become a poet and had I not um, been a musician.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, when did music happen and how did music happen?
Music happened when I was 6 or 4, and my mom taught me how to play the piano, and she'd give me lessons. And I have a musical family, so my first cousin, my mother's sister's only daughter, is Carole King. You know the
Oh,
singer?
yeah, yeah.
And she was my first cousin. Um, so I would see her growing up, and she was singing that kind of music. And my parents said, "That's not your kind of music. You can't listen to any of that." Classical music, yes, and so the music was always there, and I'd always thought of myself as a musician throughout.
You perform now regularly?
I don't lately, and I chose not to be a soloist. So I chose to accompany. I don't know, my I like the accompanying role rather than being spotlighted because I can't memorize my work, whether it's words or whether it's music. But if you give me something, my sight reading's good. I have relative perfect pitch, like Carol, we're relative. If you say, "Ba," that's a C, and maybe it's close, but I'm probably off a half step. I need to hear what a C is, and then I can figure it out. Um, so don't go testing to see if that "ba" is a C or not. But yeah, so the music was always there, and then the poetry came, and then someone said translation, and like a perfect storm, I had things in place, and then I translated with the ear and the whole thing with getting the music in it, and
So you read it aloud and translate? That's how you do it?
so I read it aloud, but a poem. There's the poem. Can I read it in
Yeah,
French?
of course, of course.
Yeah. This poem. This one is a poem not of mine, but it's the poem I'd say that probably resonated with me in high school and then has transformed my translating into the sounds. And it's by Verlaine, and it's the chanson d'automne, the song of autumn, but the sounds. So he's got all those nasality sounds, the on, the the on, and he has them at the end of the line, which makes them hop up. So this one's chanson d'automne, and it's about a violin. Like the violin is sobbing because it's autumn and it's wounding his heart with its monotony, and because it ends with like a dead leaf. The leaf floating down and then is dead. So that reminds me of my naivete poem with oh the the snowflakes splotzing at the end. So it's les sanglots lents des violons de l'automne blessent mon cœur d'une langueur monotone, tout suffocant et blême quand sonne l'heure. Je me souviens des jours anciens et je pleure et je m'en vais au vent mauvais qui m'emporte de ça, de là, pareil à la feuille morte. You can, even if you don't understand what's going on here, those sounds just grip you. And so in my translation, I am very aware of sounds, and that propels me to musicality.
Can you play the poem now in the way that you read?
Oh, wouldn't that be great to really bring that in? I can't, but because the
Because it sounds so
composing is.
musical. You said that you hear something and you can play. You don't have to read it, right? You just said. So I thought when you were reciting the poem, I thought there is a musicality.
Yeah, I wish that might be something to try. I think the way it translates for me into the the translation is I choose authors who are particularly musical. So I don't take my way of translating and stick it onto anybody I translate. If an author is not rich with sounds and musicality. But with French, French is such a musical language because of the repetition of the sounds, the ER, the A that appears when you have an infinitive. Many infinitives have that EA in it. Just like in Spanish, you have your abas and your ibas for imperfect tense, but those to me don't count as much as with the fabric as a word that's not a verb in a tense and uses that. So then I know the author is particularly interested in that sound and is bringing it forth with a noun or an adjective that has that ending there.
Yeah. Now, being a musician, right? There is a poem, and for any prose or poem, there is a musicality to it, especially a poem, right? And there is a meaning, right? What it alludes to, a poem.
I'm
So, how do you
laughing
balance
because in the
both?
beginning, that was like, oh my gosh, the meaning. I have to stick to the meaning. It matters. But then, no, but you have to make it sound beautiful. Uh, and what are you going to do? And to me now, it seems like a continuum that people you can't do a literal translation and call it literary. So you have to be literary in some way, and you have to take elements from the original and make it supreme, and that helps your decisions. So for me, I've chosen musical text, so musicality is supreme. And so the diction, the historical context, the voice in there, those are all important. But if I have this amazing rhyme or slant rhyme, I prefer that's going to really fit the context, and the meaning is uh, something else gets jettisoned. But if it's close enough to the meaning, then I choose it. But if it's just a beautiful sound and it has nothing to do with what the meaning is, then I can't allow myself to have it. So I'm one of those who is like, I got to get the meaning across because the author wrote it. So who am I to change the word? And I translate prose and I translate poetry. I think in poetry, every single word is counting, whereas prose, you get by with a little bit of narrative that there's not much choice on, though there is if there's a musicality involved. So I don't want to sacrifice what the author is saying and the way they're saying, and even sometimes the syntax of what they're saying. I have my my prison with gold gold bars, and I can escape it, um, but most of the time I don't want to, and maybe that's why I'm drawn to more experimental writing too, because then if there's a neologism, anything goes, because the most important thing is the sound of it versus the exact meaning. Um, Karl Torabuli, who writes about indentured workers and whose book um, I translated, Cargo Hold of Stars, and everything is word games, puzzles. His name Carl is pronounced the same as cargo hold in French, Carl, C-A-L-E, and his name is K-H-A-L. And then he plays with the word Carl, and he plays with coulis and breaks it up. And so I have a lot more freedom to steer away from the meaning, because to me the sound of it, to underscore the seriousness of the themes of the torture and terrible voyages of indentured workers from um, China, from India, going to Mauritius, it brings out the horror of it. So he has stuff. One of the most challenging was loin de poix, point de loi, he says. Loin de poix, far away from pitch, from tar, the stuff that boats, because he's talking about ship, far away from that. There's no law in the high seas, law and legal proceedings there. Um, but literally, I couldn't switch around those consonants. Loin de poix, point de loi, with the P and the L, and I couldn't do that. So finally, I came up with far from pitch, which also means tar, but also the sea pitching and the waves pitching. Law is ditched. And he didn't say that exactly, but the use of that, I thought, was a way to get across what he was trying to do with those. And that's just a teeny, teeny, tiny part of that entire book. It was filled with things like that. But because I had spent weeks worrying about how to best get that across, it's burned in my brain. But when it's not that experimental, and when it's the words there, and I'm gonna go, what does that mean? Why is the author, maybe I can change it, but I can't change it. And the authors are usually not pleased when I make suggestions like, I don't know what this is saying, couldn't use it. No, that's a different story, but you can't really do that. So my hands are tied if this is the way it was written in the original, unless I can make a case for my word choice really gets across what the intent is. But because of the musicality and the context, then maybe I can deviate a little bit from the meaning. But I'm more of a um, want to be I want to be with the meaning in the same room. Meaning's got to be there. I can't just run off without it.
The book that you have translated, the poems that you have translated of Samira Negrouche, SOLIO. For it, there is a beautiful foreword written by you. And there is a lot of historical context too. So, how often, before you get into the translation of a particular work, how often you try to get to know about the historical context, and how much do you, what is your prior preparation?
Each book that I translate, and Samira's book, no exception, um, I want to know more about the author. And so I look, and I discovered that Marilyn Hacker was the one who introduced Samira to an English speaking audience. And I came across Samira. I didn't choose her, but Patrick Williamson, who's a professor at the Sorbonne and has written at least two anthologies of Francophone writers from Africa and the Middle East. And he asked me, would I do a supplement of three different writers, Tenella Boni from Cote d'Ivoire, and Benus Kouligata from Lebanon, and Samira from Algeria. And so I said yes. It was a few poems to translate. And it turned out that I know it's a long winded response to your question. The my second husband, who took the course at the Writer Center, had married a French woman, and so at some point I said, "Oh, would she be interested in looking over some of my translations and blah blah?" And he said, "No, she wouldn't." And then I said, "Okay, I'll continue looking." And the next day he said, "Oh, she would. She's interested." And she'd never been a translator, but she's French speaker. And she loved translation so much with me working on a couple of books that she upped and went to the Sorbonne and got a degree, a graduate degree in translation. So it ignited a passion in her. And so it turned out that when Patrick suggested this, I asked her and I said, "Hey, Patrick mentioned it." And she said, "Is this your Patrick or mine?" Because apparently she had taken a course with him at the Sorbonne. And so, yes, it was the same Patrick, and we collaborated on this special section of Francophone literature. So with Samira, I did my research. I looked at other books that were out there, and there was Marilyn Hacker's prize-winning book, and there was a few little translations on the web, and then I got books that talked about Samira as a writer and her significance as an Algerian writer, and learned about um, a very important thing about SOLIO is it's a collaboration, and it's two books in one, and um, one is collaborated with a choreographer, Fatou Cissé, from Senegal, I think. And the other is a collaboration with a theorbist. I'd never heard of a theorbist before, and a violinist. So to know that gave me general idea of where these books are coming from before I even open it, to get a sense of what she's about, and to understand she doesn't get into she has vague pronouns because she's addressing humanity coming in a cloud of white with pilgrims, and coming at her, and then she's part of the crowd, and then she's not because they leave, and she's there, and it's almost like her soul's journey through to find its place. And um, that helped me understand her writing. And then I sat down for number 11. I started out, that was what I was asked for the supplement for the High Window in UK, has a lovely magazine. So number 11, out of all that context, I wanted to get some context, and the 11 is like, to me, the height of this book, and it comes at the end of the book, and it's just what the truths that come out of it are earth shattering to me. In the space between us, there's so much. There's what's said and never will be said. There's what's written and never will be written. There's what's thought. There's also what's neglected. In the space between us, there's a cloud of impossibles. Like birdsong, we can't transcribe. There's the weight of time. There's the weight of histories we don't share. In the space between us, there are also the accidents overwhelming us, those that sometimes open a door. We sometimes see this door and sometimes choose to take it. If I speak to you, I speak through what we lack. This lack is our chance, the only true excuse for venturing out on the road. The impulse comes from what we call instinct, virus, inner voice. But isn't what we lack what we most want to make exist? We draw lines where they weigh us down. And because we drew them, Now we can erase them, letting the sea return to its peaceful swaying. I came from an earlier time to remind you of the promise of dawn. Every child is a child of the renewed dawn who will teach us again the profound song, the intimate rhythm of ourselves. I came from that time that amasses horizons and sifts through them one by one with care, giving each its measure. I came from the Algiers door to reach the peak of Toubkal. I came from the manuscripts of Timbuktu to bring the word to the sages of Kilimanjaro. I came from the N'Djamena door. I almost got sunstroke in Cotonou. I was madly in love with Zanzibar. I came through the Cape Town door, unable to read the meaning of stars. I dreamt of crossing that triangle that could take me from Cairo to Sagia al-Amra. I entered 100 times through the Gore door, where I left a rosary of tears. I entered through Gore, where I tried to come back to life. SOLIO. I entered through so many doors, passed through so much of myself. SOLIO. Everywhere I was told about wounds and pardons, those we no longer wait for, those that one day will come, those we'll pretend not to owe. People often spoke to me straight in the eyes. SOLIO. I came back from my crossing to tell you my last prayer. SOLIO. God is a black woman with legs covered in soot. SOLIO. Make sure to honor these black legs covered in soot. SOLIO. And so you will be.
Beautiful. So this is the first poem that you translated of Samira's?
This was the first one, and then I had a long conversation with her about what does solio mean. The book was not called Solio because it's a combination of two books, and we needed to come up with a name. And Solio it reminds you of Latin, and sol, the sun, and it also means the throne. But it's also what the Clio might say of whether the audience is ready in West Africa to hear something that's going to be said. So it's a very rich word. And rather than trying to have another word to evoke the two books, one is called Traces, and the other is called K, Quay in English, K21. Um, and it's a composition in three sections. So to encompass both of those, it just seemed like Solio seemed like the perfect title there. So it was the first thing I translated, and I loved it. And in musicality, the rhythm is important. And I think with Samira, as you could hear, the musicality of the rhythm is even more important than the sounds that are coming forth. That there's just a relentless rhythm that is repeated there. And so then I said to Samira, um, no, first I checked with Marilyn Hacker. So I emailed Marilyn and I said, hey, if I translate Samira, some books, is that okay? And she's very gracious and she said, we don't own our authors and that's just fine. Um, similarly, when I translated René Char, the 20th century great giant, I got in touch with Marianne Cause because she had done so much of the translation of Char. And she said, oh, the more the merrier, get the work out there. Lots of people are, even Beckett was translating René Char. So, but I think it's a courtesy. I don't think all translators do that, but I feel ethically that if there's someone who is tied really closely to a particular author, I want to get their blessing that I can go ahead. Um, so she said fine, and so then I asked Samira, would that be okay if we did a project together? And she was very enthusiastic, and we came across these two books she thought might work well together. And so then I started working on them. And when I work on this one is different because it's continuous. There are no titles. There are some sections, but it just goes and goes from the first page to the last. Maybe in traces there are section 1, 2, and I just read 11, the last section. The title is 11. Ugh. Um, so typically, I won't read a book to its end before I translate it. I want to maintain the excitement and the enjoyment of it. Now I know that's unorthodox.
Very unorthodox. Yeah.
Many of my colleagues are given projects and they're offered a pittance of money to translate the project. And so I would assume they read the whole thing to see um, whether they want to do it. And with Karl Torabuli, he had a novel that he had written and he asked me to translate it, but that's on hold right now. And I read the whole novel. It's a novel in poetry. And I read the whole thing because who wants to be doing it and then discovering, well, this is not what I want to do. So I admit to doing that, but mostly I hop around. And again, with the shortness. So I look for a short poem. The author's writing 5-page poems, and I'm like, let me look at a few short poems and do that. And then when I start to work, I start with a few short poems to just get a feel for them and then delve into some. But I hop around to look for what calls out to me because that's the way when I first translated René Chao, it was selected. And I was given the advice to just pick what resonated with me. And he has hundreds and hundreds of poems. So I just picked what resonated. So with SOLIO, I believe that I am trying to think, and I think because I like to get excerpts into the small presses, literary journals. And when you have one continuous thing, it's a little awkward to say, I'm sending you pages 32 to 41 for your consideration for publication and blah, blah, blah. But that's what happened, other than the discrete, I'm sending you number 2 from traces. So I think that I still hopped. I hopped with excerpts, but because in the K book everything runs into everything else, and maybe there's a new page and it's kind of like a new section, and I would go to what was calling to me, what the humor. There's something about the guardian angel and the you are walking, and the guardian angel who doesn't like the color green. But he, and it is a he, but pink is okay, and something about pistachios that he likes pistachios or doesn't, and that was humorous. Here we are in this nondescript landscape of walking around the soul almost in the world about a guardian angel with preferences. So I thought that was very interesting. And so the places, or there's an echo of a voice, a one voice, one line, then it joins with two voices and then three. And I thought that was a discrete section that seemed very interesting to me too. And um, so I guess in answer to your question, I don't tend to read the books, but I do tend to choose my own books. I'm not doing this as a living, so I'm not dependent on editors coming to me and asking me, would I translate this book? And then me evaluating and figuring out how much I should charge and that kind of thing. So with Solio, it was piecemeal. Maybe that drove Samira crazy that I would have questions here and then new pages elsewhere and trying to do that. Um, but that's my process because I'm working full time with my day job And so I want to be interested. I want to choose writers who interest me enough for me to take on as a project. I I'm very lucky about Seagull Books, to have a family with Seagull. And when I started with René Chal, I did this with Tupelo Press, and um, that was amazing. And I'm part of the Tupelo Press family. But when I translated Abdurrahman Waberi from Djibouti, um, I I read in Patrick Williamson's anthology some excerpts from Abdu, and I contacted him along with Carl Torrebully by Facebook. And Abdu responded, but Carl's message got lost in other. So I didn't see it for a year that he had responded. So I went with Abdu. It turned out he was teaching, I was at the University of the District of Columbia, which is an HBCU, which addresses a little bit about who I choose to, writers of color, who I choose to translate. And we met at the Starbucks, and we said we're going to work together on an NEA grant that was due in like a month. And, he said, sure, we could do it. And so I did 10 poems and showed it to him. And the first two, and I picked the ones that spoke to me. And the first two, he said, you could do better. And I'm like, "What? You're telling me this? Okay, fine, I'll push myself some more." And so we won the NEA, and so the Nomads, my brother's drink from the Big Dipper, came into existence. But not quite, because here we had a finished manuscript, but no publisher. So I I he suggested Seagull, and I said, "Seagull Books in Calcutta?" And at that time, I'd not heard of Seagull Books.
When was this? When was this?
This was, maybe 2012. And I was used to the US scene of small presses and the places. And, and I had gone with Tupelo Press for Suzanne Drassus from Martinique, an amazing writer there. So I thought, well, I could maybe go back to Tupelo, but the Seagull, let me think about it. And then it turned out when I did my research, a lot of research goes into translation to find out where this fits, where Seagull does. And when I found out about Seagull Books, I looked at the books they had done, like the beautiful covers and the designs, and I thought, wow, they pay so much attention to the feel and the look and the graphics. I didn't know about Shinanjini and her graphic designs, and she is amazing. But at the time, I had to do a yes no, and so then it turned out that my friends Nicole and David Ball, whom I'd met at ALTA, the American Literary Translators Association, and they had befriended me. They had published with Seagull, and I asked them what was it like working with Seagull, and they amazing team and the quality of the books and the what is it? The unique gift that Naveen Kishore, the founding publisher and editor there, has in choosing books. And then because I like academia, I'm part of academia, when I learned that they're distributed by the University of Chicago Press. And so they have a presence here in the United States with a very prestigious press here. I thought, huh, why don't why don't we go with that? I guess I'm sold because the books are beautiful. They're going to pay me some money. My friends could attest to the way they were treated beautifully. And Abdu, who had already published some work with the Balls at Seagull, was okay with it. He said, "It's your decision totally." So my gut was, "I'll do it." And then amazingly, because I'm a night owl, that's also part of why we're meeting now rather than
Yeah.
early in the morning. That even without a trip to Korea, that was not going to happen. Um, I started talking to Naveen, and because of the hours difference, it would be like 1 or 2 o'clock for me, but midnight or before. And then he asked what I was working on besides Abdu, and I said I was translating a novel. I was co-translating with Catherine, my second husband's wife. We co-translated a novel together, and I said I was working on this novel by Suzanne Dracius, and I'd send him excerpts of it, and or I didn't send him excerpts of it, and he said, oh, he said, I'll publish it. And I'm like, what? You haven't even seen the fact that I can translate Abdu and here, and he does this by gut. And so then I would send to, and then that developed into, he published the novel, and the next person I was working with, I guess was Carl, and I'd send him little things to get him curious about it. And with Samira, back to Samira and Solio, I sent him number 11, and he said, "Oh," he said, "Send me more." And, I sent him more, and I think at very early on, he said, "Oh, I wanna publish this." And so that's been our relationship, where I with Alain Mabankou, sent him a few of those, and he was in love with that, and Carl Torabuli with the connection to India. He was enthusiastic, and I feel a little guilty because I sent him some from Louis Philippe d'Alembert from Haiti, and he said he would publish it, but I've gotten stalled in that because we had a switch in books, and so I haven't been able to. But um, it's wonderful to be working with them, and they paid my way to come to Calcutta to teach a translation course. And I'm not really, I don't know, adventuresome. To go to Calcutta, that was not something I envisioned myself doing. And but I said yes. I said yes, and I went, and it was just life changing to see in you picture the streets of Calcutta, people cooking in the streets and living in the cracked sidewalks, and you see a door, and you go in, and there's origami and paintings and books lined every wall, and there's the team of four from Seagull sitting in there making beautiful books, and uh, life changing, truly life changing. Uh, so I am so part of the family and love publishing with them. And a little segue was to one of the books I'm currently finishing up. And back to Abdu. And Abdu, I translated his first book. I translated poetry. I translated his second poetry book. And then I won an Albertine grant to publish, to do his third book. When we only have the earth. But the stipulation with Albertine is you need to be published in the United States. So that meant that it couldn't be published by Seagull. And so I went, I don't know, I just feel what? An obligation. I try to be ethical about it. And I went to Naveen and I said, is it okay if I publish with a press in the United States and not you for this third book? Because he kind of, two books by this author, and I'm going to not publish a third book with them. And he was very gracious, and he said, "Of course, and he gave me his blessing."
No, he was on our podcast too. He was wonderful. It was one of the best interviews we had. Yeah.
He is wonderful and generous and kind, but gifted as a poet himself and an editor and publisher. Oh my gosh. Um, and Shinandini and all the graphics, doing every cover, um, and Bishan doing all the uh, editing. He's been the editor for so many of the books, and Shayoni, who also has edited some of the books. And before I go to the that where I'm going, I want to mention what editor at a most prestigious press in the world is gracious enough when I said, and here's some poems that I've written, and I did that, and he liked them. And then I said, would you even consider publishing the work of a no name American poet? That's not in his catalog, really. And um, and he said yes. And not only did he publish An Infusion of Violets, but he published Piano in the Dark. So I mean, I am so loyal to him. But Kwame Dawes from the African poetry book series, and I had been talking, and he had said, that would be great if one day you and had a translation. And so, long story short, the committee met, they looked at the finished manuscript, and they voted that it can be part of the series. And so the new book by Abdu is coming out in March, and um, from the University of Nebraska Press, who publishes them. So it's a new press for me, and we're just put the last period, though I don't think he uses periods, maybe for a few poems, on the galleys. And we just got the cover officially approved. So as of 2 days ago, there's a cover for when we only have the earth. It's a very save the planet. It's a paradise is here and nowhere else kind of book, even though it's infused with Sufi and Buddhist and Quran wisdom. So that was me going to another press, a US based press, which it's new for me, um, but wonderful in its own right, and also with Naveen. And Naveen and I are working on, maybe he said yes because we're already working on a project that I just counted. There are 38 poems in it, and many of them are 4 to 5 pages. And I just did the 19th poem. Yes. Um, it's the author is the gifted writer Sylvie Condé, and Sylvie Condé is French Senegalese, and she founded the Francophone program at NYU, and she is her work is the book is called, I've called it, in French it's gestuelle, but it's gestuary, and it's a compilation like a glossary, but it's a glossary of gestures. And in some ways, because I teach online, when the gods of technology are looking on us favorably, I do want to mess with it where we've gotten going. Um, So Sylvie is saying that the body's gestures are a language in itself. The body is a language in itself. And so then that opens up writings about racism, about um, her childhood, about people who have come and gone, about the dead who come back. There's a surrealistic component, a piece about sugarcane coming to life and following people down a hill. Uh, so again, I started with Patrick, Patrick from the Sorbonne, and Patrick had by then published a second anthology, and Sylvie was in that, and he said, "Oh, why don't you consider Sylvie?" And because I'm drawn to women authors too, if I can, because there aren't that many women poets coming from Africa that I'm aware of, and here's someone suggesting someone like Patrick, and so I loved the samples that I read. Again, I have not read the book. I know how it ends, um, but I've been just picking and choosing. And so Naveen saw a few of these, and Sylvie is published by Gallimard, the most one of the best publishers in France, and she's got 3 books, I think, from them. And so he immediately said, "Yes, this is great. Um, let's move forward." And so then that's the project. It's due in March, so I'm getting a little panicky. But heck, if I'm up to 19 and they're 33, this morning I thought it was 38. It's 33, so it's probably doable for March.
Absolutely. Now, Senegal, Haiti, Nigeria, you have a preference for translating parts of color.
I do, and I come by it honestly. Uh, in my third marriage, my husband had he's deceased, so I guess it's had. He had four sons, all African American, and so I got to know the culture a little bit more than I had before. And um, my day job is a counselor, and I was a school counselor, and I was very active in bringing HBCUs to Montgomery County Public Schools and running these on the spot admission scholarship events where students are offered money on the spot. And each year, over $2 million of scholarship money. And I felt like I was being a little bit of an agent of social justice, breaking down barriers for our kids to get into college. And so then I found myself when I left my career of many, many decades as a school counselor and working in central office too, um, with school counselors. I found myself at an HBCU teaching at the University of the District of Columbia. And then that overlapped when I started um, translating a little bit. And then I thought, well, why don't I bring voices? First off, when you bring any voice into English and it's unknown, you are helping give voice to people who would not have a voice or an audience in an English speaking world. And then I thought, why don't I bring voices that might even be marginalized in this country who are not writing in English? And in the counseling world, a lot of the concepts in counseling are the same concepts as translation. So there's the concept of empathy. If
That's
how
interesting. Yeah.
how can I translate someone who's I can't see it, I can't walk in their shoes, and I'm just translating their words. That's hence all the research and trying to do that. Understand them. You need in both worlds, in counseling and in translating, you need to build trust. And if you don't have the trust, then your author is going to be fighting everything you say because they're thinking, and especially writers of color, it's another form of oppression. Here I am putting my views onto their writing, what they can say, what they can't say. And so it takes a long, and in a counseling session, you're not going to get anywhere unless that client trusts you. So there's that, and there's worldview. So our clients come with a totally different worldview that I have to learn to acknowledge, not judge, accept. Similarly, in translation, the worldview, I have to learn what that is of my authors to be able to do um, a decent job in bringing across their ideas. So that overlap, one of the key aspects of school counseling and clinical mental health counseling, I train both kinds of counselors, is to be an advocate for your client and to be an agent of positive social change and social justice. And that comes from counseling. And because translation is so much part of who I am and what I stand for, along with counseling, I chose to bring voices in that might be overlooked. I chose to write. Who knew I would be involved with bringing the history of indenture to an English speaking audience in the voices of the indentured, the millions, the voices. That's how that book is set up. Um, so it's eye opening for me to see my little place in this world and the histories of this world, the people who I get to meet, many of them. So Suzanne Dracius I've met in Martinique, and I've met in Paris a couple of times, and uh, Alain Maboncourt. I got tracked him down for when he'd be at UCLA and LA because he's traveling the world 3/4 of his time, it seems like. And we had a lunch in a cafe in LA, and we went over the manuscript. Abdu, who I see not regularly, but periodically, who comes to DC for one semester a year. So I get invited into their worlds. Um, and it's thrilling. And it's, I can't describe the joy that it gives me. And then I become more passionate than ever. I'm excited that I'll meet Sylvie on one of my New York trips because she's located there. Uh, and so I don't I don't consider translating anybody else. I guess, and I ventured into Algeria, so it's Algeria and then to the Middle East with Lebanon, French speaking Lebanon. I've not translated any women writers or anybody from Quebec, and I'd like to, or Vietnam, and I'd like to do that. But they don't they're not quite the same as Africa and the Caribbean. They don't fit under that umbrella.
Now, you said you started poetry, writing poetry, therapeutic. You said a way to come out of some trauma. So when we come to this piano in the dark, right?
Yeah, the piano in the dark is it's my third full length collection, and then there are a couple of chapbooks running around. So it has most of my themes in it, but the most immediate theme was my mother's death, and um, she died at age 97, so she had a long fulfilled life. She also taught me piano. She also was the president of the American Association of Teachers of French, and she also was at the highest level of the Palmes Académiques, where she was, uh, I guess, you can be a chevalier, you can be she was a commandeur, the highest level there. And so, in some ways, her French and her music um, and her drive to just be accomplished. She was not at home raising us; she was out working. Um, so the book is dedicated to my mom and has a poem or two about her, but it also picks up on some of my earlier themes about um, losing the losing a baby the day he was born, and but now with looking back on that, so decades of looking back on it, and then along the way, as it is, um, as we live, bad things happen, and I I am so happy that I have poetry that I learned that by writing about Matthew and giving him a presence in the world with King's Highway, uh, that when, and it took 20 years to do, but when I got cancer, I thought, well, I don't really have 20 years to sit and dwell on it. I need to do something. And so that was an infusion of violets and the infusion, the chemo that you have, and all kinds of things that come through the body. It's infused and hopefully leave. So this Piano in the Dark is a looking back on now 10 years from the cancer and where I am having gone through that, but it's more of a darker themed one in that uh, it looks at that line from Samira, the something rhythm of ourselves, the intimate rhythm of ourselves. That line, and it wasn't selves, but cells, cells, the intimate rhythm of ourselves that really um, we don't pay attention to, but it's going. And so this book, I almost thought I could borrow that line and title it that instead of The Piano in the Dark. But because my mother taught me piano and it resonated with me that Chopin preferred to play in the dark, uh, um, practice in the dark in the salons. And he obviously didn't need to read the music like I do because I can't memorize like that. Um, so the poems are about the body, which is interesting because the Sylvie poems that I'm translating are about the body and the gestures and the hand gestures, um, a statue with an arm around the pharaoh and what that gesture that's engraved in stone signifies. So the poems are about the body, mortality, uh, those fun things, which again, I guess I've always been writing like that. So my poetry tends to be like a dark poet. But lately I've found that um, I have more of a uh, humor in it. Maybe from Cal, that if you're talking about really dark things like indenture, um, if you have some humor, you need some relief, there it makes the darker even darker. Um, and so I write a lot of villanelles. And villanelles and form are important to me in that I think because I'm writing about huge emotions. And so to put it in a form keeps me from getting sentimental and keeps me fresh because I need to have a slant rhyme for a word at the end or the repeated lines coming there. And then it has to work at the end, which is always disappointing when you've written the whole thing and the last line doesn't do it. And you're like, okay, so what? So I write quite a few of those. Should I read one of those villanelles?
So tell us about your writing process.
The process is the same and different for writing and translation. I need to have a clear brain. And if it's the week where I have to grade 30 counseling videos and do site visits to all my counselors spread out across the country with phone. I started it right before the pandemic, and it was a perfect job to have during pandemic. Didn't have to leave the house, and I still am doing that. And I get really passionate about training counselors, and especially with the things that the translation has opened my eyes to things in counseling too. So I do work full time. We're on the quarter system. I get 3 weeks kind of downtime, but I still need to be on call for committees and all. And then it's the quarter again, 10-week quarters. So I am teaching quite a lot, and it doesn't clear the brain. So typically by Friday night, the brain is starting to clear. And that's the best time. Oh, it's Friday today. That's the best time to say to myself, I haven't written a poem of mine for a long time. It's time. Let's sit down. But nothing's going to come of it. It's never going to be any good. You're just going to sit down. You have your chocolate here. Um, you have something munchy, some chips, and you're going to sit down. Not too many, because can't. don't want to binge on it too much, and you're going to write. And then all the ideas that I have that have been gathering now for several months, it's been, I look at them and see anything pop up, and then I go, let's just start with this. It's not going anywhere. And then I write, and maybe I write for several hours and go to bed. And then I don't know if it's any good or not until the morning when I can see things. And it's a different brain. And I see, oh, and either it's, this is awful, this is, ugh, or it's, wow, this is pretty good. I'm not sure what it's about yet, but it needs to continue. And then I'll continue during the day to add to it, and then the nighttime again, then let it sit a couple of days and then go back to it, and um, show it to, you need a trusted reader, and I show it to my trusted reader who's been my trusted reader for a couple of decades now. And depending on what he says, and if he doesn't respond to me, I go, oh, he hates it. And it's my internal critic. And I then go back to it and try to. And what I long for is when he goes, fabulous, this is it. And then I need that. The translation, I don't need that. The translation, I know if it's on target or not. And I can do that, certain parts of it, any time of the day. So I can do it in the afternoon, even if my brain is a little occupied. Uh, Yesterday, Thanksgiving, my daughter was at the visiting at the dining room table, and I brought down my laptop and I brought down the poem. I had already sound mapped it. You can only do that in the morning with the assonances and the alliterations and the rhythms and the wordplay. And so I interrogate every word and look it up in two dictionaries and write it down there. But then when I'm ready to put it together, I need to be functioning well. So that's a good first thing in the morning thing, to put it together for a first draft, to look at it, um, highlight all the problems, the issues that are going to come up, that I'm going to have to spend time agonizing over to come up with a certain sound or a certain way to make that work. Um, and then when there's a French question, and then I check with Catherine, my ex-husband's wife, and that can draw on. But I noticed it's taken me 2 months to finish that one poem about the pharaoh statue and the arm around them, and I can't keep that pace up to be done by March. So I'm like inspired again. Um, so that process needs a lot, and it takes a lot out of you, because I sometimes I'll stay up till 3 or even later if I'm on a roll, and that's not really healthy. Um, but if that's what it takes to get another one of my poems, because it's been months, then I'm gonna I'm gonna have to do that. Um, and right now is a good time because the quarter just started, and so there's the beginning stuff, but it's a little bit not heavy duty till a week or two from now, and then I'm not going to be able to do it.
You started poetry as a therapeutic way of dealing with trauma. How therapeutic is translation for you?
That's a good question. I guess the translation is therapeutic in that it makes me feel I've accomplished something and completed a challenge that I don't know going into, that sense of ambiguity. Like, you don't know if the poem is going to go anywhere. You don't know if you're going to succeed in this project. You kind of guess you will because you know enough about it, but you don't know how the book ends, which I purposely do. So it keeps me a little bit anxious. Um, Therapeutic in seeing myself. I think, I think I don't, I get wisdom about how to view the world. That's true. I get to look at the world in a different way. It's more feeding my intellect than my emotions. I don't get comforted by the poets I choose. Um, I I guess I don't have to confront my own personal issues there. And so I don't choose. I was toying with a play written by two females who had lost their female authors who Spanish speaking who had lost their sons to suicide. And I thought I just don't want to go there. Um, Translating Wendy Guerra, Spanish, co-translation with Esperanza Hope Snyder, in some ways, um, Wendy is very sensual and writes about sex, and the worst thing about incest is the name of her poem, even though I don't think she, well, who knows, but her heroine is Anais Nin, who apparently was involved in all kinds of things. Um, it was kind of living vicariously at this wild sex life. So it was personal in that, but the people I translate have lives that are very distinct from mine. And while I can see things going on in their internal struggles, emotional struggles, I think you're right that there's a difference. There's a wall there of me not, boundaries in counseling. And I think I don't get drawn into that emotionally. Whereas when I write, I'm trying hard not to. Let's write something that's not about me and not about my trauma. Okay, let's write about, and I'm thinking, trying to write about the Korea and what trip and what I learned there. It's outside of me a little bit, but it's hard to get into it. Um, the draw is harder. It's easier for me to just here we go with another death poem or a baby dying or a cancer, allude to cancer, or why not about our divorces? That's fun. Um, yeah.
Okay, okay, we'll get on to the poem now.
And the more I talk about it, I guess I'm going to read the divorce poem. That's
Please.
I like reading about that one. I don't know because it's lighthearted and it's a villanelle, um, and it has a song written by Moshe Dor, Arab Shel Shoshanim. My friend Barbara was married to Moshe Dor, and that that's a popular song. So it's called Ode to Three X's. It's on page 63. And remember, the task is to have those repeating lines come and then come at the end and be mean more than they did starting up. Ode to Three X's. Ex-husbands, like other catastrophes, come in threes. One dead, one fled to New York, and one out of touch. The lost and found blues can be sung in any key. Sometimes the one who's left is the one who leaves first, after years holding close the same grudge. Ex-husbands, leavers or left, come in threes. If shoe hits glass or glass hits shoe to seal the chuppah vows, it's always a glass that gets crushed. The lost and found blues can be sung in any key. Erev Shel Shoshanim will not guarantee eternal evenings of roses and coos of doves. Ex-husbands, like celebrity deaths, come in threes, even marriages outside the fold. Years later, a new wedding band, and with luck, the lost and found blues won't be sung in my key, and no one will add to the wake of decrees, voided ketubas, and deeds covered in dust. The lost and found blues can be sung in a brighter key. Ex-husbands, count them, come in threes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation.
I'm very grateful to you for hosting me and for making this happen. And we 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 got it done, right?
Yeah, we got it
And,
done. Yeah,
and I love your series, and I hope you'll continue doing
we will,
more.
we will, we will continue
It's,
definitely. This
it's
is the
wonderful.
fourth year running. Hopefully, some more years.